Okay, we are on Nun Amud Aleph, 50A1, Gufa, the last word, if you're in English, and the last word of the first column. So yesterday we saw two opinions as to why, that when a person goes ahead and establishes their tchum under a tree, but an undefined space under the tree, we saw two opinions as to why it doesn't work. And one opinion was, the reason was, it's anything which is not kol asher, anything that's not zeh achar zeh. Anytime you can't do something one after another, if you do it at the same time, it doesn't work. So meaning, a person says, my tchum should be under that tree. That tree is 8 amos wide. Okay? Now you cannot, so it's not valid. Why is it not valid? So one of the reasons was that because since if I were to say my tchum should be under the right side of the tree and then it should be under the left side of the tree, if I were to say that, it wouldn't work because you could only have one space where your tchum is, right? Because it's your residence. So in as much as I can't say my tchum will be over here and then over here, since I won't be able to say that one after another, therefore when I say my tchum should be under the tree, which is basically saying both those statements as one, it also doesn't work. And the principle is anything which wouldn't work one after another doesn't work when you do it at the same time. Make sense? And now the Gemara is going to question that principle. We're going to jump around throughout different sugyas in Shas, different halachos, all from all over the place. And as we'll see, they're going to be, we'll try to make this as, we'll see. We'll talk a little bit about the practical applications of these halachos as well. So, Gufa, the we mentioned above. Amar Rabba said, Kol davar she'eno bezeh achar zeh. Any, situation which cannot take effect consecutively, meaning one after another. Afilu vas achas eno. It also will not be able to take effect simultaneously. And fine, that was the principle. And now the Gemara is going to ask questions on this approach. Esvei Abaye l'Rabba. Abaye asks a question on Rabba. Hamarbe b'ma'asros. If a person gives more than 10% for meiser. Now, meiser over here, we use the word meiser for meiser ksafim, for 10% that we give from our money. And there you could give more. On the contrary, it's encouraged to give more. For those of you learning Smichas Chaver, we spoke about, the Gemara says you could give up to 20, up to 20%. And the post, some, Rav Shechter, argues that nowadays, like we're all rich, even if we're not rich. But he says, back in the day, they had in their house, they had enough food, enough money for a day, for a week. Like now we have savings, we have this, we have that. And he argues we should certainly be giving more. He said not only should we be giving 20%, he said even 20%, which is listed as a limit, that's only back in the day. But nowadays you could give, more because people have savings and people have all that. And therefore, encourages that we give more. But here we're not talking about Meiser Ksafim. Meiser Ksafim is a minhag. I want to be, very clear. It's one of the oldest minhagim. It's a beautiful minhag. It's a minhag that if a person's able to take on, they should take on. But it's a minhag. That's Meiser Ksafim. Then there's that's not even Duraban. It's not obligated. It's a custom. Again, a beautiful and strong custom. And a custom. And again, if a person starts doing this custom, it becomes obligatory because you're taking on the custom. But it's not a mitzvah d'oraisa, and it's not a mitzvah d'rabanan. You're not commanded to do so, okay? You do have a mitzvah called tzedakah, which is a separate thing, which is that if a poor person comes to you, you are obligated to respond to them. But the notion of taking a percentage or 10% of your income to give it to the poor or give it to different needs is not something which is obligatory. It's a custom. This over here, we're talking about meiser, the obligation. Okay, the original meiser, the OG meiser, which is when a person has produce, you have to give a percentage of your produce to. The way it works is like this. The first thing you do is you give a small percentage to the Kohen. Okay, so we'll use a good number example over here. Let's say a person has 51 bundles of wheat. Okay, so what they would do is they would give 1% to the Kohen, and that would suffice as truma. The Torah actually doesn't discuss the exact amount for truma. Fine, but let's say you give 1% to the Kohen. The next thing you have to do is give Meiser Rishon. You're giving 10%, and that's 10%. 10% of 50 is 5, and that you give to the Levi. Okay, and the Levi has to give a portion of that to the Kohen. Once you do that, then your food is misukan. It is now fixed, and you're allowed to eat the food. Okay, fine. So let's say a person goes ahead and marbe, and in this case, when it comes to meiser ksafim, you're going to give 12%, 15%, 30%. Fine, no problem. But here, hamarbe b'masros, in a case of biblical, the Torah obligation of meiser, let's say a person gives, instead of giving 10%, they give 20%. Okay, perosav misukanim. the produce becomes fit for consumption because they separated the meiser. They took off what has to be taken off. However, the produce itself, which you give to a Levi, uma'asrosa mikukalan, the meiser is ruined and cannot be eaten by the Levi. Right? You give it to the Levi, you think you're doing a favor. I'm giving you more. You're actually giving him less. He can't eat anything. Why? Because now it's a mix. The 20% that you just gave him is a mix between, meiser and tevel, untithed food, because you're giving him a mix of both of them, and therefore the Levi is unable to eat any of it. So on the one hand, you took off what had to be taken off, but he's there on a technicality. The Levi is unable to eat any of the things that he's eating. And the Gemara asks, Amai, or Abai asks, why is this so? Kol she'eno b'zecher zeh. Why is it even effective, right? So on a technicality, you can't eat it. But the question is, why is it effective? If I were to go ahead and say, hey, 10% of my food is going to be given as Meiser Rishon, and then an additional 10% is going to be given as Meiser Rishon, the second Meiser Rishon, nothing happens to it. Right? In other words, if I have, again, 50 bundles of produce, I already gave Truma, and I say, hey, Max, Mr. Levy, here's 10% of my produce, 5, and today I have to pick on you. What's it called? So today's 5, and then an additional 5 is going to be Meiser as well. The second 5 is nothing. It is not, I could give you 2 as a gift, but it's not Meiser, right? So if I give Meiser and then I try giving a second time Meiser, it doesn't do anything. And we just established a principle, whenever it's something which cannot happen one after another, if I do it at once, it doesn't do anything at all, right? So in as much as I can't give you 5 and then 5, right? That would do nothing. The second one would be ineffective entirely. So based on the principle we saw above, anything which cannot happen consecutively, when I do it all at once, it shouldn't work as well. So why over here are we saying that it's efficient Meiser? If I know if I would give you 5 and then 5, it wouldn't work. Why over here is my food tithed? It should be completely, nothing should happen. Yeah? Yeah? So the Gemara says, Shani Meiser is different. Meiser is different in the sense... Shouldn't be able to eat the food, right? So I mean, we're not getting stuck on that. There's a technicality that when I gave you too much, you can't eat it. But we're focusing on the first part. Why is my food fixed? Why is my food tithed? When I give you 20%, why is it tithed? At the end of the day, what I've done is I've given you 10 and 10 and 10% and 10%. And since that wouldn't work, why does it work when I give it to you at once? Doesn't make any sense. Okay, so the Gemara says Shani Meiser Isle Chatza, and Meiser is different because it could take effect on halves. Di Amar Tikdosh Palga Dechita Kacha. If I were to say let the half of each grain of wheat be sanctified as Meiser, it would be sanctified. Meaning, when I give you 20%. Theoretically, what really could be happening over there is that I'm not actually saying, when I gave you 20%, we reinterpret the words to mean that I wasn't giving you 10 bundles. Rather, I gave you 10 bundles, but what I meant is that a half of each of those bundles should be sanctified. Right? In other words, since that could work, I could give you a bundle and say half of it is Meiser, half of it is just regular stuff. Now, it'd be annoying to you, Max, because now you don't know which one's which, and you have to eat one in a different state. But the point is, I could do that. Since I could do that, in this particular case, we reinterpret the person's words to say that when they gave 20% and not 10% to Max, what they were doing is they were saying, I wasn't really giving you 20%, they're giving 20% of food, but only 10% of it was meant to be Meiser, and that's not something, and therefore it's not that I was giving you 10% and then 10%, it was that I gave you only 10%. I gave you 20% of my produce? Yeah. The other 10% of that 20%, that was just a gift, meaning it wasn't something which was meant to be Meiser. And therefore, meaning since I'm able to go ahead and splice my gifts, therefore, right, meaning I could give you a bundle and say only 50% of it is actually going to be sanctified, is going to be, is going to be tithed, is going to be Meiser. Therefore, it wasn't that I did something which was, the question was, again, how, if I give 10% and then 10%, it wouldn't work. Why does it work when I do it at once? The answer is, we're assuming that you didn't actually give 10% and 10%. I only gave you 10%. I gave you 20% of produce, but 10% of that produce was completely mundane. It was only 10% that was actually meant to be Meiser. Okay? Whereas in the case of the Eruv, which is this is all based upon, the question is based upon, you can't do a half an Eruv. I have to have a defined place, and therefore there's no question from this case of Meiser to the case of an Eruv. Now, let's just talk practically for a second. Many people assume Trumas Meisers don't exist anymore. We don't have a base of Mikdash, etc., etc. It's not true. It's not true. They 100% exist. Any produce from Israel where it doesn't say Trumas and Meisers were taken, or so either definitively or you're not sure, then we have an obligation to take Trumas and Meisers. So, for example, a little while ago, Trader Joe's was selling carrots. right? Everyone's excited. They're selling stuff. I think it was carrots, carrots that are made in like Jaffa. Carrots are made in like Israel, right? And so everyone's excited. Oh, I'm buying produce from Israel. Guess what? You might be like in violation of a biblical law because you're eating something which Trumas and Meiser are not taken from. At the same time, it's nice to support the Israeli economy, so it's a good thing to buy. So the question is, what do? The answer is that we still take Trumas and Meisers. In Israel, if you go into a store, it says they took Trumas and Meisers, they've taken Trumas and Meisers. Now, who are they giving it to? Are they giving it to the Kohen? The answer is no, because the whole process begins by giving it to a Kohen. A Kohen has to eat the Truma in a state of sanctity, and he's unable to. He's unable to because he can't, we assume every Kohen is Tamei Mace. We assume he's come into contact with the dead, and therefore, Truma can be a man or woman or whatever it is. And the point is that therefore it is, you can't give the Truma. The whole process we're stuck with the process, and yet we have to give Trumas and Meisros. So what do we do? So what we do is, you can find there's like a little text that you say, basically, this portion of the, I'm gonna, basically you go through a whole declaration where you are designating a portion of the food, the produce, to be Trumos, to be Truma, and to be Meiser, and to Netzervai, all the different things that it could possibly be. You break off a little portion. Now that portion technically should go to Kohen, and technically should then go to Levi. The problem is, again, the whole process, we can't really give it to anyone. So what we do, we double wrap it, we throw it in the garbage, because we cannot eat it. But now, what do? We can't before we throw it in the garbage, we can't do that, because how could you throw away produce, which is Trumas and Meiser? So what we do is we then say, and it should be designated, the sanctity of the produce should be transferred onto a coin. Okay, so you take a coin and you transfer it onto a coin, and then that coin also can't be used, but at least that is, or whatever, that you're allowed to get rid of as well. So basically, you end up doing is you designate a portion of the food, of the produce. It's like 1/100th. It's like a small portion onto the, the carrots or whatever it's going to be, and then you transfer. Again, you could get the text on Starkey or all the kosher websites. You transfer the kedusha, the sanctity, onto a coin, and you throw them both in the garbage, and you are good to go. Okay, so it's not something, again, in Israel, you want to make sure that things are that it says hufrash, that the Trumas and Meiser have been taken, that someone there did the ceremony, did the separation. But in America, again, it's important to note where things are coming from, and to make sure that your produce is not coming from Israel. If it is, and again, it's beautiful, let it come from Israel, but then you have to go through this process to make sure that you are not in violation of a biblical law of eating things which are untithed. Okay, fine. Ask the Gemara further. What about meiser of animals? So the answer we gave above was, it's not a problem, because meiser of produce, you could take a bundle and you could say half of it is going to be half of it's going to be meiser. When it comes to animals, you can't do that. So what are we talking about? There's something called meiser behema. We're learning all the different meisers now. Meiser behema is every year an owner of livestock has to give 10% of his livestock to the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, so what does that mean? What that means is that what they do is they put all their animals into a pen. They put it into like a closed off space, and then they make sure it's a small opening, and then they let them go through. Okay, everyone goes through, and the owner stands over the doorway and counts animal 1, animal 2, animal 3, animal 4, animal 5, and then when the 10th animal comes out, he puts a little paint, so a little piece of red paint, and then that animal is designated for the Beis Hamikdash, right? And then you keep on going, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, and that's designated for the Beis Hamikdash. That's every year you give 10% of the new livestock to the Beis Hamikdash. That's called meiser behema, and we have the following halacha of Amar Rava: Yatzu shnayim basiri. Let's say two animals exited together. Okay, let's say, it's a small opening, but sometimes two of them exit together. Ukrana Siri. And then the person goes ahead, Rava says the person goes ahead and designates them both as the 10th animal. He says, you are number 10, but you in the plural, right? He says there's two of them that go out together as the 10th, right? 10 and 11. So they're both become Meiser. Asir v'achadasir mo'arafim zebazeh, the 10th and 11th are intermingled. Okay? Now, the challenge is, wait a second. If they were to go out one after another, let's say the 10th goes out and then the 11th goes out, then the 11th is not sanctified, right? So isn't this again, doesn't this go in the face of the principle that we've been saying? That anything which is not one after another, if it happens together, it's also not going to be good. Right? In other words, if it goes out one after another, then it shouldn't be good. So here too, 10, if you would say 10 you're meiser, and then 11 you're meiser, that's meaningless, right? It should be meaningless. And so therefore, why when 10 and 11 go out together, and I say they are meiser, does it work? that based on the principle of kol asher eina b'zeh achar zeh, anything which isn't consecutive should not happen at the same time. The Gemara says no. Ma'aser behema is different. Why? Shani ma'aser behema. Ma'aser behema is different. To isei b'zeh achar zeh b'taos. There is a application of them of sanctity taking place when they are designated as meiser by mistake. Meaning, Titznan, Karla Chi Asir. Let's say the person was bad at counting, okay? And the ninth goes out, and he says, number 10, even though he realizes, wait, did I just miss a number? Right, it happens, okay? Ula Asir Chi. Or the 10th one, he calls the ninth one. Meaning the real one that's 10, he says, that's 9. He goes, oh, I missed one, and he says, to the 10th one, he says, that's 9. Ula Achar Asir Asiri. And then by the 11th one, he says, that's 10. In other words, these are all different scenarios where the person's going ahead and making mistakes in his counting. Shlashta mikudashin. If that all happens together, meaning all happens one after another, meaning the 9th goes out, he says number 10. And then he goes, wait, did I mess up? And then the 10th goes out, he says, oh, that's number 9. And then the 11th goes out, he says, oh, that's number 10. Now, they can't all be Meiser. The answer is they are all Meiser. They're all consecrated. Okay, that basically is based on a pasuk that says that when you designate certain animals, even if it's based on a mistaken count, then it does actually make them holy. So what you see from here is that Meiser Behema is unique based on that extra limud, based on an extra pasuk, that when you do a bezech or zeh, when you do 9 is kadosh, 10 is kadosh, say this one is holy, this one is holy. It does work consecutively. That's why when they go out, 10 and 11 go out together, they will also be sanctified together as one. Okay? Make sense? Fine. And therefore it's not a question. One more question. Vari toda delesa. What about the toda offering, where if you mistakenly consecrate, it's ineffective? In other words, the answer by Meiser Behema was no, if you make a mistaken designation, then it works. By toda offering, if you mistakenly consecrate something for it, now what we're referring to over here is not the animal, but there are loaves. How many loaves? When you bring a carbon toda, you have to bring 40 loaves of bread together with it. We'll talk about why in a moment. But the point is that if you mistakenly say, that these 40 loaves are designated for the toda, and it's a mistake, it doesn't take effect. And if you consecrate 40 loaves, and then you consecrate a second 40 loaves, it's meaningless. Okay, so it's not zechar zeh, and nonetheless. All right, so it's a case where it's zeh or zeh does not work. One after another does not work. V'itmar, and yet it was taught. Toda shenishchatal shmonim chalos. If let's say a person slaughtered their animal, their toda offering, with not 40 but 80. Okay, so Chizkiah says that 40 of those 80 become consecrated with it. Okay, that even though you did it with too many, right? It's something which it would not work b'zeh achar zeh. Right? If you went ahead and said 40, and then 40 would do nothing. But here you said 80. Chizkiah says it works. 40 of those 80 become consecrated. Rabbi Yochanan says nothing actually took place. But the point is that at least according to Chizkiah, even though if I designate 40 and then I designate another 40, it would be meaningless. But here I do it together once, it does work, at least for the 40. So you see, it's a case where consecutive consecration would not work, and yet when it's done at the same time, it does work. Again, that goes in the face of Rabbah's rule. So when it says, no, ha'itmar Allah, it was taught about this. Amar Rav Zera said in regards to the machlokas between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan, ha'kol modim, all agree, heicha da'amar likachu arba mitoch shmonim, wherever a person says, let 40 of the 80 be consecrated, dekachi. If you designated 40 out of the 80, then of course that works, since you explicitly said only 40 of the 80. Lo yikdachu arbaim, if a person said explicitly, la yikdashu arbaim elam kein kachu shmonim. Person says, I only want 40 to be consecrated if all 80 become consecrated. If you want to say that all 80 should be consecrated, it doesn't work. You can't do that because it's only supposed to be 40. It's only in a situation where you have 80 in front of you and the person was not specific. Mar Savar lachrayas kamachaven. Chizkiah holds that the reason that it works is not because you've consecrated all 80. It's because you've designated 40, and then you're concerned maybe if the 40 will get ruined. In other words, the base of English is a place of high intensity. Just like in any store, whatever, like a place where they produce things, like contamination possibilities. They're very careful about like if the wrong thing gets mixed in, whatever it is. In the base of English, there's a lot of concern, like the wrong things will come into contact with your consecrated foods. So if I want to bring my carbon soda and I say, listen, I don't want to have any issues, so I consecrate 40, and I say, and these 40 will be a backup. Right? So in other words, I say 40 of the 80 should be holy. The implication according to Chizkiah is not that you're consecrating both, because we know you can't do that, right? And what's really happening over here is that you've consecrated 40, and the next 40 are meant to be as a backup. There he says, so when I said 40 and 80, when I said 80, like that these 40 of these 80 should be kadosh. It wasn't saying like I should be 40, and then another 40 should be kadosh at the same time. All it was saying is that the next 40 will be acting as a backup. And basically what's happening is it's a condition, right? Basically I'm saying it's conditional. If the 40 become tamei for whatever reason, if they get contaminated, then the next 40 will be a backup. Umar Savar 50b1, lekarvan gadol kamechavein. Rav Yochanan holds that when a person goes ahead and consecrates all 80, he's really intending to bring an offering of 80 loaves, and that can't happen. That's meaningless. And that's why nothing actually takes effect. The point is that what we're answering is that you asked the question that by the Toda, if a person goes ahead and says 80 should be kadosh, then it works. But why does it work? If I were to say 40 and then 40, it wouldn't work. So why when I say 80, does 40 of the 80 work? It's basically, it's another case where it's one thing after another wouldn't work. And yet at the same time, it seems like it is working. The answer is no, because I never was saying 40 and 40 should work over here. All I'm saying is 40, Rechizkiah is interpreting the person's words to mean 40 should be kadosh. And if 40 get messed up, then 40 will back it up. But the person was never intending to say 40 and then 40. Okay, and therefore the Gemara is basically rests its prosecution and says, well, we haven't found any challenges on Rabbah, and Rabbah's principle still stands. It's just a beautiful thing, just to point out that by the Korban Toda, this notion of 40 loaves of bread. Imagine that. A guy goes to, a person goes to the base of Mikdash and says, okay, I have to bring a Korban Toda, right? You bring one Korban. Normally you bring, no bread comes along. With the Korban Toda, you have to bring like an incredible amount of bread, and it all has to be eaten in a very short amount of time. It's not like you bring it home, put it in the freezer, and you eat it for the entire year for Lechem Mishnah. No. You have to eat it all within a very short amount of time. And the same with the meat. It's not coincidental that you bring this insane 40 loaves of bread. It's a lot of bread. Right? Which one family is eating 40 loaves of bread? And the answer is that's exactly the point. When it comes to thinking Hashem, the Korban builds into it it forces us to share it and to share why we're bringing the Korban Toda. In other words, you have 40 loaves of bread. They have to be eaten by a certain amount of time. You're in Yerushalayim, right? You live in Baltimore. And you come to Yerushalayim because you went through, something terrible happened to you and you were saved, Baruch Hashem, and you want to bring a Korban Toda. Great. Or you're obligated to bring a Korban Toda. You come, you bring the Korban Toda, and now you have 40 loaves of bread. So, you sit there with your family, and you invited your second cousins and your third cousins, and you still have 30 loaves of bread left. So what do? You invite more people, and you invite more people, and you invite more people. You're like, hey, why are we having this meal? Because Hashem saved me. I was in this, whatever it was, I was in this terrible situation, and I was saved. Unbelievable. And you get to share that story over and over again, and this is the basis for what is known as a Suda Saudah. When a bad thing happens to a person, the idea is that to have a meal, right? Meals get people's attention, and usually get people through the door, and they come to the meal, and the idea of the meal is to share with them what happened, right? This is the Korban Toda was a Suda Saudah. It was a situation where you're bringing a lot of people in to then learn about, and they learn by definition, and you invite them, hey, something amazing happened to me, Hashem saved me, Hodel Hashem Kitov, and you bring them in and giving the opportunity to share it. So again, it's not like this newfangled idea. The Korban Toda itself was built in this, it was compelled you to go ahead and share the story, and that's, again, if a person is in such a situation, it is, the idea of bringing other people is basically not a reenactment, but an extension of the original Korban Toda. Okay, have a wonderful day.